Welcome to ICE Webinars, a cool place for hot topics. ICE Magazine is proud to bring our new monthly webinar series to the imaging industry. ICE is the community that directly links nearly 7,000 imaging professionals with a monthly magazine, online community, annual conference, and now a monthly webinar series. We would like to invite you to ICE 2021 on May 11th and 12th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The Imaging Conference and Expo is the only conference dedicated to imaging directors, radiology administrators, and imaging engineers from hospital imaging departments, freestanding imaging centers, and group practices. ICE 2021 offers 32 education credits from AHRA, and in keeping in line with our successful conferences in the past, offers comprehensive educational opportunities for attendees. ICE would like to thank our sponsor, Accruent. Accruent's intelligence for the built environment aims to improve operational efficiency, regulatory compliance, and the quality of patient care, and to drive gains in performance and availability of healthcare assets, including facility and biomedical equipment. For more information, please visit accruent.com. We're excited about today's presentation featuring Al Gresh, Vice President of Healthcare Strategy at Accruent. Today's webinar is eligible for one ARRT Category A Continuing Education Credit by AHRA, and it's approved for one CRA credit. You can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. More details on this at the end of today's webinar. As I mentioned, our presenter today is Al Gresh. In addition to his current leadership role, he has held executive roles at AlphaSource, TriMedics, and Alexian Brothers Health System. In addition, he authored the 2019 Healthcare Technology Management Manual for AMI. Al, you may begin whenever you are ready.
Thank you so much. So I want to make sure that everybody in attendance today understands that the title is exactly what this will be. It's beyond the basics. I'm not going to cover how to put together an in-house imaging program for the most part. It's going to be around just what it says, how to develop the ultimate imaging service program, a program that your customers will rave about. So we've got a lot of information to cover today, so let's jump right in. Our agenda for today, we're going to talk about how imaging service is different than biomed service, what imaging customers need, how to increase equipment uptime, how to minimize the cost to service ratio on imaging modalities, how to continually raise the bar with your service delivery, and then lastly, the 6 steps to success. Let's start with how imaging service is different than biomed service. Some of this is pretty intuitive. Regulatory requirements. Certainly there are requirements that are around imaging equipment that's addressed by both the Joint Commission and DNVGL, but there's a whole nother list of regulatory requirements that are laid out by ACR, the American College of Radiology, and obviously you're going to need to know what those are. I'm not going to cover what those are today, but like I said, this is not about the step-by-step on how to develop a program. Training, the difference is that it isn't like, you take a biomed guy who went to college to get a 2-year associate's degree or a 4-year college on biomedical engineering, and they're going to be able to fix most things without additional training. That's not the case here. Certainly, there are programs that offer good basic foundations on how imaging equipment works, but most of the devices that they service are going to require specific training, and it's specific to each device. Those training programs can be very costly. You're generally talking 1 to 2 weeks of training, sometimes as much as $20, $25, $30,000 per class. The tools and test equipment that you need are going to be different. Obviously, there's a variety of phantoms that you're going to need to employ, step wedge, alignment tools, diagnostic software, and generally the cost of doing business in this arena beyond just the training is very, very different. If you look at the comparison of parts, labor, or contract cost, there's a significant contrast. The comparison of the dollars generated by each study is significant. This is why your executive leadership is so interested in uptime on equipment and wants to make sure that that uptime is being maximized so that they can generate that additional revenue. But the most important differentiator between biomedical and imaging is the financial and patient care impact that it has on your organization. I just alluded to that, and it's why executive leadership is so intent on making sure those systems are up and running. And so the urgency that with which you need to respond is paramount, as well as the constant communication to those department leaders and to your executive team. Back in the late 1800s, Lord Kelvin said, when you can measure what you are speaking about and express it in numbers, you know something about it. But when you cannot measure it, when you cannot express it in numbers, your knowledge is of a meager and unsatisfactory kind. And why that's important is you better be able to measure the performance of your program. When we first ramped up our program in my past lives, I readily recognized that I need to timestamp everything: when the call came in, when it was responded to, when it was delayed for whatever reason, and when it was completed, and make sure that I was communicating back to the department on a regular basis on those things. Consider what you're being compared to. If you can't demonstrate and validate your performance, then it becomes a matter of perception, and that's just not a good place to be. And my mantra had always been, if we can't do as well or better than the current service provider for less money, then we shouldn't take it on. Instead, I should work to get the best option, the best service option, and negotiate the best price until I do have the right pieces in place to do better. And at the end of the day, there were only 4 modalities that we didn't provide top level service on. That was the Gamma knife and the Cyber knife, because they were one of a kind, very specialized devices that I just didn't feel that we'd be able to maintain a high level of competency on, because we just weren't going to see it enough. The surgical robots, because if you know anything about the vendor who's the one game in town for that, they're not very accommodating with regard to training and repair parts. And then surgical and GI scopes. But other than that, we reached a point where we delivered an extremely high level of service on all other imaging modalities. So what I'm showing you right now is the downtime reporting. This is one of the metrics that we tracked and reported on, and so we needed to make sure that everyone was measuring and documenting that downtime in exactly the same way. So I won't read through the entire thing, but if you go down to the procedure part of it, in calculating downtime, you calculated down to the 10th of an hour based on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week during the hours of operation of the owning department. Downtime begins when the customer requests service and ends when the unit is available for clinical use based on the department's hours of operation. So an example, if the department was closed for the weekend or holiday, there's no downtime during that period of time. I will tell you that over time, we updated this policy. And the reason we started here is you have to start with an apples to apples comparison, right? So we went through our existing contracts and what the language was around uh, measuring downtime, and we followed that just so that we were comparing apples to apples as we started. But then we moved beyond it. So beyond the policy, these were all of the modalities that we tracked downtime on. So there were actually some general biomed devices we tracked downtime. All imaging devices we tracked downtime. Specialty biomed devices like lasers and sterilizers, we also tracked downtime on that. And then of course ventilators. I want to show you the KPIs that I tracked and reported monthly to my leadership, because some of these things are vitally important and directly related to our discussion today. So I reported on cost savings and cost avoidances, cost of service ratio, and we tracked these month over month and reported them. And you can see that at the end of this particular year, we were at 4.02% cost of service ratio across the board, which if you understand what's average in the industry, it's generally accepted that around 5% is cost of service ratio is really good. And so we did really well with that. Number of devices per technician we tracked, downtime hours for major modalities, and so again, going back to tracking metrics and reporting metrics, we wanted to make sure that we did report on that. And the number you see under this benchmark column is the total number of hours for all of the devices that we had in our inventory. So the benchmark for linear accelerator, for example, was a total of just under 47 hours. CT just over 60 hours. We had a lot of CTs in the system. We only had one PET scanner, so just 1 hour for that, and then MRI 26. And then if you move all the way to the right, in the last column, you'll see a variance from those targets. And I will tell you that anything that you see in red, we went about creating an action plan to address why we didn't hit our targets. And the reason we reported this monthly is so that we could track our progress month over month and proactively try and make adjustments as we went, so that we had a better chance of hitting those targets. And then repair hours, the last two. This is important, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later. We tracked the total number of corrective and planned maintenance hours because our thought was that if we did everything that we could to maximize uptime and did more planned maintenance, that we could potentially decrease our corrective maintenance, and that plays a huge role in increasing your uptime. And from this particular year, you will see, if you look all the way to the right, that with an additional 135 hours invested in planned maintenance, we were able to decrease our corrective maintenance by over 1,500 hours, and that's critical. Some other things that we tracked were how much service was completed in-house. We spent a lot of money training our in-house guys to do this work, and so we didn't want to pay double to have others also do a bunch of work for us. You're never going to get away from that 100%. Because we have commitments to our customer to achieve targets, uptime targets, and response time targets. And so, you are going to have to call in outside resources from time to time. We tracked any events that were called in after hours. We tracked productivity, response time, both in-house and vendor. And then lastly, but probably most importantly, customer satisfaction. Let's jump to what imaging customers need. You want to know what your imaging customers need? Ask them. We did exactly that. Before we started this program, we surveyed all of our customers to ask them a series of questions like, what's the maximum response time that you would still consider excellent service? Again, we wanted to set the bar very high, and then we used that survey information to plan out what we needed in the way of resources and how we would achieve that response time expectation. And the things that I found in talking to our customers around what it is that they needed, three things really came out front and center. They needed communication, constant and timely communication. I had a series of meetings with our system director of radiology and his management team. And when we first proposed this program and building it out, I made it clear that this wasn't being done as simply a way to save money, because if we saved money on contract cost, but gave it back and then some on increased downtime, then nobody was benefiting from that. And so it was our plan to deliver service that was better than what they were getting, at least equivalent to what they were getting, but in most cases better than what they were getting. And then I went to subsequent meetings after that initial meeting, and we started out with tell me what went well, and then tell me what didn't go so well. And then in the time between that meeting and the next meeting, we would go about making sure that we address those things that hadn't gone so well, but at the same time looking for ways to even further accelerate the things that were going well. And after 4 meetings, it was the management team that didn't feel the need to meet anymore, because all of their expectations were being met or exceeded. And I will tell you that this was a very, very reluctant group of individuals that were really hesitant to move forward with this program. Another thing that they made clear was what they needed was expedience, right? Again, I talk about uptime being critically important, and so they needed to make sure that things were being responded to in a timely manner. And again, this goes back to having the ability to timestamp when calls came in and when they were responded to, so that we could report back what our response time was, both callback and in-person response time, and they expected maximum uptime. One of the things that might seem a little bit trivial, but isn't, we put so much emphasis on good communication. Again, going back to the expectations that they needed constant and timely communication. We actually went to the point of developing a communication policy, and I'm happy to share this with anyone who's interested. But you'll see in the definitions here, we cover the types of communication, both internal, external, and then a combination of the two, both internal and external, the levels of communication urgency and action, and then the methods of communication. And our procedure was this communication process to ensure effective two-way communication. We'll implement a multi-tiered information distribution approach, and all clinical engineering announcements and changes and in processes and or procedures that affect a large number of caregivers or the entire department will be sent to the respective leadership teams prior to the release for questions and clarity. And then we set out expectations. You'll see here under work requests that there were expectations set on the technicians for emergent requests, that they respond within 15 minutes, and they're required to respond on site to the requesting department within 2 hours. Understand that we had off-site buildings and clinics that we had to respond to, and that's why that was set at 2 hours. In most instances, it was much shorter than that, and you'll see that called out in the next line here. Note that response times are set as a maximum allowable time. CE technicians are required to respond to emergent requests in as expedient a manner as possible. So again, we held ourselves accountable to hit those targets that we set. And then, a different set of expectations for priority and routine requests. But again, the response, the callback response, still within 15 minutes. And then we had a process for the clinical engineering service center where people would call in, and this was our mechanism to make sure that everything was time stamped. At the time, our CMMS didn't have the ability to do that. Our computerized maintenance management software didn't have the ability to do that. So we developed a centralized call center that everyone would call into, and they had the ability to dispatch that call to the right person. Every device in our inventory had a primary, secondary, and tertiary technician assigned to it, so that we could make sure that the right person with the right set of skills was always responding to these calls, and they were also broken out by geography, again, to make sure that the closest person got to those calls quickly. And then we covered customer notifications, and what we needed to do, who we needed to communicate with when there were major issues that came up in emergent situations, what we were required to do to update the customers, with meetings, to make sure that there were minutes recorded for every meeting, so that we knew what discussion points, conclusions, and assignments with deadlines. So again, we developed a very, very high level of accountability. And then here we had a CE website where we posted a lot of information, both for our technicians, so they had a level of access to that outside customers did not have, but there was also good information available for our customers as well. This is a life cycle of requests, and I always like to hold this up, because you can see what typically happens with a request. It comes in, then the call center would determine which group is supposed to get that. Is the device under warranty? And then they would dispatch it either to our own technicians or to the third party that was responsible for that. And then if you drop down in the lower right, there were material logistics. So this is included parts ordering and processing, asset logistics if you had to send something out, and then moves on to the service execution and recording materials, labor, and data. But the thing I really want to call out here is that if you look at the dashed lines in the middle of the screen here, every one of those dashed lines represent a communication back to the customer. So every single change in status and update would be routed back to the customer, so that they always knew what was going on. I do a number of consulting engagements with healthcare organizations, and specifically clinical engineering departments. And as part of that, I meet with clinicians, clinical leaders, and ask them how they view the service that they're getting. And without exception, the biggest complaint that I hear is, I never know what's going on with my stuff. I put in a request and it goes into a black hole. So we wanted to make sure that that wasn't happening here, and I think it's important, if you want to have a top performing program, that you do the same. One of the ways that we communicated, again, we didn't have the ability with our CMMS at the time to provide real-time feedback that was visual to everyone. And so we worked with our web development team to build out this status board. And this is particularly important for the imaging leaders, because they could at any moment look at this board, and you had a couple of ways to access it. There was a web-based portal you could go in and look at, and you can see at the top here, you could from the drop down put in your site and your department, and you would see all of the requests and the status of those requests. And there were 3 different status levels. One was that it was requested but not assigned. The yellow means it was in progress, and then the green was that it was completed. And as things were completed, you could set this up so that those would drop down to the bottom, but you could always see what was going on with your requests. And the thing that this prompted with our own staff is you don't it doesn't do anybody any good if you wait until the end of the day to update your work orders. So your work order updates had to be real time in order for this to bring value. And of course, now most modern CMMSs have the ability to provide real-time feedback to their customers, and you can set that up to respond only to the requester or to anyone from that department that's looking to check status. Jim Lico is the CEO of our parent company, Fortive. They also own a number of different opcos like ASP and Fluke. But we had our leadership summit last week, and this is something that really struck me as being important to understand, that high expectation is the greatest compliment you can pay someone, because it says, I believe in you. And this is true of the expectations that your customer has of you. It's also important with regard to the expectations that you have with your own staff. Let's talk about some of the ways to increase equipment uptime. So the first thing is data. And by the way, yes, we did actually have a data integrity policy. Happy to share that with anybody as well, because we needed to make sure that there was consistency in our data. I will go to the next couple slides. So some of the things that we covered with that is we had a standardized set of codes for request, result, and fault codes. And those were all clearly defined. We trained our technicians on what codes to use in what situations. Why was that important? Because we needed to make sure that everybody was documenting things the same way. But this particular piece, when you look at these fault codes, we could actually run reports on using this code to see exactly how things were failing. And that would help us in this second piece is to become proactive rather than reactive. So if we could prevent things from failing in the first place, if you can imagine, that's something that's significantly going to impact our equipment uptime. And you know, again, that fed into, well, it wasn't called AEM at the time, but we had a program like it in place. So I'm saying here, leverage your AEM. And you might say, oh, wait a minute, Al, CMS clearly states that imaging equipment isn't allowed to be on an AEM program. And what I tell people is, well, yes, you need to follow manufacturer's recommendations. It's absolutely true. But there's nothing that prevents you from doing more than what the manufacturer recommends. And this is where we used that data to help us identify where things were failing, how they were failing, and to, if it could make an impact, to add steps to the PM in order to help reduce those failures. Next thing is to do as much as possible during off hours. So, you know, let's say on a CT, you might have a very, very lengthy PM that could take a room down for an entire day. And what we did instead is we broke up those PMs into smaller chunks. And I talked to a lot of my friends still in the industry that do exactly the same thing. And then those guys would come in early and do that smaller bite-sized piece of the PM, and that would make the room available as much as possible. Remote monitoring. Many of you may pay for that service or get it as part of a contract with the OEM, and we developed our own remote monitoring capabilities with the highly trained staff that we had. Ensure your staff, and this goes to the next one, ensure your staff has the training that they need. If they have the training and are as competent as they can possibly be, it's going to take them less time to diagnose the problem, get the unit fixed and back online, and that's going to increase your uptime. And then lastly, ensure that you're tracking your supplier performance and holding them accountable. Because if you get a DOA part or a late part delivery or a wrong part delivery, think about what that does to your equipment downtime. And the other thing that I looked at relative to this was, how does it look to the customer, right? If I have to go tell them that the system is going to be down for another day, they're looking at me as the person that perhaps isn't as competent as I need to be. And so, we wanted to make sure that we held our suppliers accountable. And then the last thing, we had access to the scheduling software so that we could look at opportunities to take advantage of time that was consistently not used, and that helped us as well with our scheduling of work. So it's all of the grayed out areas when this particular room was not being used. Let's talk about how to minimize the cost of service ratio on imaging modalities. You're going to see here that a lot of these are the same. And think about it. If I do everything that I can to minimize my downtime, I should minimize my costs as well, right? So the stuff that we talked about relative to data. But I added to this, what parts will I need? Because if I understand in advance what parts I'm going to need, and this is particularly true with glassware. We had a number of Toshiba Aquilian CTs, and I would go to them with information about what I expected to use, and we had put together a glassware projection tool that tracked tube failures over time, so that became pretty accurate. And I could go to Toshiba and say, if I commit to you buying whatever that number was, six CT tubes this year, what kind of price can you give me? And you would be amazed how much you can save on negotiating things in that manner. Again, become proactive rather than reactive. Leveraging your AEM, doing more than is required. These last things are critically important. Get involved in the negotiations at the time of purchase. That's the time when you have all the leverage, when you still got those capital dollars in hand, and you can effectively negotiate parts discounts, time, materials, labor discounts, both standard and overtime rates, diagnostic software keys, training. There are a lot of times where you can actually get training thrown into the purchase. So many things that impact your cost of service ratio can be negotiated to better pricing at the time when you still have those capital dollars. Equipment standardization. This is also key. If you can standardize on one make and model of a particular device type, again, you can leverage the volume to help reduce those costs. Again, ensure your staff has the training that they need, and then ensure you're tracking supplier performance and holding them accountable. So how can we continually raise the bar with service delivery? a great way is with customer satisfaction surveys. We did an annual customer satisfaction survey, and I'll run through some of the results of that and the things that we asked. Real-time customer satisfaction surveys, a lot of modern CMMSs now can be configured to send real-time surveys. You can pick a number, like every 10th work order, I want you to send out like a 1 or 2 question survey. And then lastly, face-to-face. I talked about the meetings that I had with the radiology leadership team on an ongoing basis, but checking in with those folks from time to time to see how are we doing and how can we do things better. Ongoing training. We again making sure that we had people trained as well as we possibly could. So we assessed that with each new purchase, and we assessed annually through staff competency assessments. And I'll show you an example of that. And then lastly, engage customers and staff to think strategically. What kind of impact is the staff experiencing? What kind of impact are patients experiencing? What kind of cost impacts are they experiencing? And not just your costs. So I'll share with you some of the things that we did to impact things, but beyond just the service component of things. Think about how can we impact all 3 of these things to provide a higher level of service and help the departments do what they need to do and take care of the patients that we serve. So here's an example of the customer satisfaction survey, and there was like 12 questions to this. And the things I want to call out here. So all of the things that we talked about early on, making sure that you optimize your response time, both verbal and on-site. So we measured that, right? And so we those are some of the questions that we asked on the survey. And the thing I think you should really pay attention to on these is the bottom row in these bar graphs was the first year that we did that, that we started surveying, and look at how the excellent responses climbed, going from 24 when we started up to 40%. Very good climb from 31 to 37%. And if you look at the box on the right where it shows the mean scores, year over year, that continually went up, and jumping in the manner that those aren't insignificant increases. So we asked the question about the promptness of on-site response, and here you can see the same thing, that because we were diligent about improving year over year and just a relentless pursuit of excellence in everything that we did, that showed in these numbers. The quality of communication, again, we talked about how important it is to your customers to have constant and complete communication. And so we asked about that and measured that. Level of courtesy of the service technician, how the equipment operated when it was returned from repair, the overall quality of services that you received. And again, just year over year, continual improvement there, because we were focused on it, and we wanted to make continual improvements year over year. I talked earlier about the competency assessment form, and so this was an annual thing that we did at performance review time, and we went from just core competencies of very basic things all the way to very specialized things, because we wanted to make sure that the folks that we had doing the service were progressing and reaching the highest level of competency. So I'm gonna run through just a couple of examples of how we employed these things. And so this was a program that we undertook to increase the level of service that we provided for ultrasounds. And so the objectives of this program was to first establish a baseline of probe data. If you're familiar with, if you're doing ultrasound service today and you're familiar with these devices, you'll know that the boxes themselves are pretty reliable. I mean, other than keyboards and trackballs, they're pretty solid, and where you incur most of the downtime and expense is relative to probes. And so again, we wanted to track the probe performance, and so these were the standards that we set. We had a tool that we employed that was built by Sonora called First Call. There are other devices now. I think their current platform is called herein, and these things aren't cheap, but I will tell you, having the ability to really understand the performance of these probes is critical. So we set thresholds for less than 4-week elements, greater than 75% of the mean value and sensitivity of the crystals, cabling, capacitance of the probe, monitoring probe data for quality and deterioration. And again, minimizing system downtime, being proactive rather than reactive, increasing the quality of the scans. I think everybody should understand that a sonographer makes all the difference in the world relative to the quality of the scans, and a lot of times these folks can make the most out of a less than stellar probe. But think about what that means relative to patient discomfort. If I'm wrenching on this thing trying to get a good scan, it's probably not very comfortable for the patient. We found that there was over time an increase in the number of repetitive motion injuries for our sonographers, and so if they had optimally performing probes, we could minimize that. And again, other objectives was to maximize our cost of service ratio, monitor the impact of these new processes, and then absolutely exceed the ACR certification requirements. And so these were the results in 2006 is when we started that, and you can see year over year a drastic increase both in the number of probes and the value of those probes. And then that dashed line along the bottom shows you what our cost of service ratio was relative to that, and you can see they're not climbing at the same rate. But the other important thing to call out here is that in 2008, so if you look on the right where it shows year over year the cost of service ratio, so before initiating this program, our cost of service ratio was about 6%, and we dropped it down to 2.43%. 2007, it was 3.38%. In 2006, 4.48. What happened here is, it's important to call out, in 2008 and 2010, we brought in a couple of large physician practices that hadn't been part of the program prior. So when we filtered out those new additions and re-looked at it, then our cost of service ratio was back down at 2.4%. And in 2011, again, we were down to 2.3% cost of service ratio, inclusive of all those new physician practices. Once again, the Lord Kelvin statement about being able to measure what you're speaking about. So this was how that played out relative to this ultrasound program. So again, we did a baseline of each probe with regard to crystals, sensitivity, capacitance, cabling, and visual inspection. Here's a probe that, according to the sonographer, worked fine, but when we did quantitative analysis of it, found that not so fine. And the thing about transducers or probes as well is it's key where those defects are, and if they're in the middle of the probe, that's where you're going to see the most degradation in image. And again, here we have the ability to quantify these things. Another program that we implemented is we met with the physicists, and we were able to align our PM schedules with the physicist certifications. We went through training with the physicists, and we were doing the exact same tests that they were doing and using the exact same equipment that they were doing. So once they were comfortable that we were replicating the work that they were doing, then we got to a point where we just sent the PM reports to the physicists for review. And a couple of the benefits of that is increased consistency and increased physicist efficiency by 15%. And that's a big deal. I think you all are aware that those folks are hard to come by, and they're very expensive resources. The last thing we're going to cover then is the 6 steps to success. And these 6 steps are true of literally anything that you undertake. The number one, you determine your goals, both short and long term. Secondly, you identify your needs, what skills, knowledge, and expertise are needed. Thirdly, you assess your current state. Which of these do I already have? Fourth, identify your gaps. Which of these do I need? And then create the plan and work the plan. And so how we went about employing those steps is created a business plan. We incorporated that plan into our department goals every year. We engaged our customers to make sure that we were meeting or exceeding their needs. We engaged our internal partners and external partners. Again, I talked about making sure that we held our parts suppliers accountable, and even our third-party service providers that we engaged from time to time, making sure that they were accountable. And then, of course, we engaged our staff. And I will tell you that that last part was key to all this, because these folks took an extremely high level of ownership. And again, I talked about this relentless pursuit of excellence, and it's the culture that we created that gave each of them a voice in how to make things better. So here's an example of our, just the key strategies of our business plan. You can see number 1 there: develop in-house support for high-end modalities. And then lastly, the 3 leadership pillars that we employed, and I think you probably got a sense of this throughout, is first is humility, heart of continuous improvement, transparency. Transparent leaders create environments that are fact-based and open, and accountability. Leaders are accountable, spend their time helping their teams to identify countermeasures to get the job done and achieve the desired results. And then we at the time we worked with a group called Afterburners, and this was their plan. It looked very similar to the PDSA model, but the important thing here was that in that last one, having a reactor team. So whatever we developed for improvement, that reactor team was our customers. And with that, Jennifer, I'm going to pass the baton back to you for Q&A.
All right. Thank you so much, Al, for all of this valuable information. As a reminder to our audience, if you have a question for Al, please use the questions feature on your GoToWebinar dashboard. We do have a few questions that have come in already. So the first one, Al, is finding qualified imaging engineers is extremely difficult. Can you offer any helpful hints in successfully finding and hiring these folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So the tactics that we used, and it was tough initially, because I couldn't, with the commitments that we made to the organization, take the time to train everybody up to deliver on the service that we committed to providing. And so I had to hire from the outside quite a bit. And where we got a lot of these folks was from the OEMs. And I think that that helped us on a number of different fronts. It gave confidence to our customers because in some cases, the person that was turning a wrench on their device after we took over service was the same person that was doing it prior. And they brought in that high level of expertise. But what it did for those engineers that we recruited was, if you understand what that person's life is like, often they'll have multi-state responsibilities or a very broad geographic area responsibility, and they're on call almost all the time, and so their ability to have any kind of quality of life, to sit down to dinner and go to a movie with their wife is almost non-existent. And so those are some of the things that we provided to those folks, is to give them that quality of life. And life's about choices, and for many of these folks that we recruited, they were at a point in their life where that was more important. They started to see that, look, I'm gone all the time, I'm missing out on all of these events in my kids' life, and I just don't want to do that anymore. So that was the first thing that we did. And then the other thing was, again, I'll go back to that competency checklist, and we did succession planning, and we talked to our own technicians about areas that they wanted to grow into. And so we did a lot of shadowing and cross training to make sure that we were growing new people into those positions.
All right, thank you. Our next question is, you talked about the development of remote monitoring for some of your imaging systems. How were you able to gain access to that information without paying the OEM?
Yeah. So here's how I looked at it. First of all, you have to have somebody with the knowledge to know how to access that. But that information resides on the device. You just have to know how to get to it and how to interpret it. And so we had some OEM, a couple of OEM engineers that had the knowledge to do that. And I think you'll find that fairly consistent, especially with folks in the imaging space, that not only do they have a high level of knowledge about the modality itself and how it operates, but also a lot of IT acumen that gives them the ability to build these things out. And again, I think it goes back to the culture that we created to have people bring to us these ideas for continuous process improvement and continually make things better. And they owned that. And so this was actually one of our engineers that came to us and said, hey, this would be great for us to have access to this, and it would provide value for our guys. Let's say if they get called in, they can go in and do diagnostics remotely before they even show up on site, and that'll help reduce the amount of time that it takes for them to fix the unit. But again,
Right,
I want to make clear that we own the devices, right? So if the information's there, we shouldn't have to worry about accessing that information. Okay, go ahead, Jen.
Great, thank you for that clarification. Our next question is, I haven't ventured down the path of doing imaging service yet, but I know it's an area with great potential for us. So where do you recommend that I begin?
So yeah, I covered one of them. I think ultrasound is a great place to start. It's not an incredibly complicated modality to service. We made great strides in saving money, but providing a higher level of service in that modality. And then the next step was we started out doing things like portables and C-arms and general rad rooms and RNF, and building up the confidence of our radiology leaders that we could do that well. and that we were committed to providing the highest level of service possible. And then when it came to taking on higher end modalities like CT, MRI, interventional, we had a level of confidence, but then just continued to prove out that how committed we were and the level of competence that we brought to that when servicing those devices.
All right, our next question is a little bit long, so hopefully we have enough time for this one. Our imaging program has moved complemented downtime reporting to looking at limited use measurement for the future. Have you seen any scenarios where limited use is being measured? After all, limited use affects patients through with the same visibility as downtime.
Yeah, no,
you need to repeat that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it goes back to when I showed the policy that we had created on downtime, and again we replicated the contractual obligations that were provided by the OEM as a starting point. But this was one of the areas that we moved past that, right? So we continued to track and monitor and report downtime as typically measured, but then added this limited use metric right along with it. And I couldn't agree more that those are the kind of things that that they either impact the clinician from the standpoint of even if it's just an annoyance, their expectation should be that that thing is 100%. So we wanted to make sure that we track that as well. So I would say yes, that in addition to just tracking downtime, if you aren't tracking limited use, and I'm not saying you necessarily count it as downtime, but it's something that you should track, report, and measure.
Thank you so much, Al, for your time today and for a great presentation. I would like to encourage everyone to visit our sponsor today to learn more about the services and the products that they provide to our industry. Please visit accruent.com. As a reminder, you can obtain your continuing education certificate by completing today's post-webinar survey. The survey will be emailed to you 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit. You'll be able to download the certificate immediately after you submit the survey. If you have any questions, please contact us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. ICE Magazine is proud to bring our monthly webinar series to the imaging industry. Thank you for being part of the ICE community. For more information about our upcoming ICE webinars, please visit icewebinars.live. Thank you all and have a great day.